Good morning and welcome back to the NNP Symposium. This session we'll be hearing from Douglas Mudd, and Doug, you can go ahead and turn on your camera and unmute if you'd like, about the new ANA Money Museum exhibit, which is titled The Metal in America. And Douglas Mudd is the curator and director of that Money Museum. So we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to send them into the Q&A at any time, but we will be talking about those at the end of the presentation. So that's all I have. Doug, I will let you take it away.
Great, thank you, Liana. Welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good morning. Today we're going to start talking about the new exhibit at the Money Museum. It's called The Metal in America, and it was quite a job for us. This was 2.5 years in the planning and about 6 months of really intense work. One of the things that we combined it with was our convention at the Broadmoor here in Colorado Springs. I don't recommend doing that. It adds a lot of extra stress, but this is an interesting exhibit for us. It was the Metal in America. It's a step out of our usual wheelhouse for our major exhibits because it focuses purely on the stories and art of metals and has no regular issue paper, currency, or coinage. So it's a little different from what I've done in the past. But this exhibit is not about metals. It is, however, about metals, what stories of metals can tell about the US and US history. When I began planning the exhibit almost 3 years ago, I had no clear idea of just what a massive task was involved. The basic theme was to show how metals can tell the story of American history from the 17th century on. A big step away from the more usual art history approach to metals, where the artists and the art of the metals is a primary consideration, with due reference to the historical, social, and artistic context of the pieces. But as I got further into my research, I realized just how much more complex the history of American metals is than I initially realized, and the huge role that the US Mint played in the development and popularization of metals within this country, especially during the 19th century. So as I realized this, I realized there'd have to be a component on how metals are made, which encouraged a side trip into the origins of metal and commemorative metals. And that led into the importance of the artists in manufacturing and so on and so on. Needless to say, I had to start making some important early decisions on what could and could not be covered in the available space. That's a typical challenge with any exhibit. How do you talk about Lincoln in 250 words in a coherent way, that kind of thing. There's just not enough space to cover everything you want to cover, whatever the topic is. Well, the result is an exhibit based on the museum's existing collections, material from loans or new donations, and after discussions with Dwight N. Manley in early 2020 on the availability of the Baker collection of Washingtonian metals. Since then, he's generously donated that collection to us, and it's now known as the Baker Manley collection. It's about 950 metals, all related to Washington, that came out of the Pennsylvania Historical Society and was based on William Spohn Baker's collection. He's the guy who initially created the first major catalog of Washingtonia, and it's been critical ever since. And so this original theme of the exhibit was refined and expanded to demonstrate the ways that metals have been used, from commemoration to celebration, propaganda or to protest, or even just for fun or beauty in modern art. Thus, the exhibit features two of our most venerated American heroes, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and how they have been depicted historically, the importance of the US Mint in the development of American medallic art, as well as the rise of private mints and popular metals for art, sports, and clubs. Anyway, I digress. Let's get on to the exhibit and talk about some of the things that you can see there. So to start out with, let's define a metal. Merriam-Webster defines a metal as a small, usually metal object bearing a religious emblem or picture. 2, a piece of metal often resembling a coin and having a stamp design that is issued to commemorate a person or event or awarded for excellence in achievement. However, a medal can be much more than this, as we know. Medals are a record of history, art, values, and interests of a society. They are a tangible record of events, people, and even the mindset of a country at a given time. This exhibit features medals produced with American topics or in the United States from the 17th century to the present day, using them to paint a vibrant picture of our nation's past and present through medallic art. Now, modern medals were introduced at the end of the 14th century in Italy, the birthplace of the Renaissance. Sorry about that. They are associated with the rise of humanism and the celebration of works of mankind that occurred during that period. Inspiration was drawn from the ancient past, especially the officially issued coins and medallions of ancient Rome that celebrated rulers and their accomplishments. With the dawn of the Renaissance, realistic works of art, especially portraits, began to be commissioned by wealthy rulers, aristocrats, and merchants to celebrate themselves, their families, and their accomplishments in sculpture or painting. At the same time, a new medium of expression developed in the form of the portrait medal, which could be produced in large numbers for wide distribution among friends, family, and subjects in a way not possible with paintings or sculptures. Since that time, they have spread throughout Europe and the world, expanding their subject matter to cover nearly all human activities. American medals have been used to celebrate individuals, record events, and indicate the power and prestige of individuals or the nation since their inception during the American Revolution. Before the Revolution, European medals celebrated North America and the region that would become the United States. The US Mint acquired technology to strike large medals by the first decade of the 19th century, replacing American reliance on foreign mints. And by the mid-1800s, homegrown medals of all sizes were produced privately for individuals and organizations. Some of these were produced as works of art and awards for competitions, while others were created to celebrate the activities of social clubs and events ranging from agricultural shows to coin conventions to political campaigns. Social activism and political satire appears, and all of these roles continue to be used today. So with that, we'll go on to the exhibit itself. As an overview, this gives an idea of the themes, the history of America through medals, the history of American medals, the public and private use of medals, and modern art medals. And here's a map of how the exhibit is laid out. So you get an idea that in the lower right, we have, just next to the intro, we have metal manufacturing, where we talk about striking and casting and the production of metals. And then we go into the early history of metals, medallic history. And we start with the United States with colonial era, the first metals produced by the government, Commedia Americana medals. And we go more or less in a sort of chronological way until we hit about the middle of the exhibit, where we get to the US Mint medals, and we cover early medals and later Indian peace medals, and so on. And then it gets a little more eclectic because we start talking about art medals and then special stories about certain medals or types of medals, military decorations, civil rights, abolition, and then a focus on modern art medals. Now, just to go through the start of this, the medals are traditionally made in one of two ways. They're either cast or struck, and our first cases show examples of different types of medals, but also the casting elements and the striking elements. So there's plasters with the sculpey or the clay on them, and there's a video above the case that shows artists at work actually sculpting the models, and then how the models are turned into molds and then used to make galvanos, and then either dyes or used to cast metals. I'm sorry. Now, here's I had to put these in because one of the things that I really enjoy are Renaissance medals, and they are a record of the history of the modern medal. So when Antonio Pisano, who lived from 1395 to 1455, who was better known as Pisanello, sculpted his first medal, he did not invent a new art medium. However, he adapted the form of Roman medallions that existed from antiquity and created a new format that became the modern portrait medal. So he's credited with being the introducer or inventor of the modern commemorative medal. This new art form uniquely expressed the revival of an interest in classical antiquity and the desire of Italian elites to immortalize their accomplishments and fame like their ancient Roman predecessors. It combined the high arts of sculpture and literature with the durability of coins, resulting in transportable artwork that perfectly fulfilled the desire for the personal and cultural immortality achieved by Rome and individuals like Julius Caesar, Cicero, and the Roman emperors. You have to remember that the Renaissance is something that occurred in the ruins, essentially, of the ancient world. Italians, the French, other peoples involved in this were surrounded by these massive buildings, these roads, things that they were just barely starting to be able to recreate. And there was a desire to emulate them and to surpass them at some point. And these medals and the artwork and the architecture that was appearing at the time was an attempt to rise to the level of their ancestors. So Pisanello's first work was inspired by the momentous visit of the Byzantine Emperor John VIII Palaeologus to Ferrara, Italy in 1438. Accompanied by the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Joseph II, John VIII met with Pope Eugenius IV in an attempt to reconcile the Greek and Roman churches and to allege Western aid and defeat the Turks. The most important part of this is that it resulted in these new commemorative medals, all of them cast early on because they did not yet have the capability of striking such large medals. Many of these medals are 90 millimeters or even larger. And so what you have is an outpouring of just wonderful, large size medals with beautiful designs, celebrating individuals that today are mostly obscure, but were very famous and powerful during their time. So Gianfrancesco I Gonzaga, first Marquess of Mantua, or I mean, this is better known because King Louis XII is known and still studied in school today. But these are wonderful medals that talk of a time and of people who are trying to achieve a form of immortality through medals. Then we'll move on to the main subject of the exhibit, which is the medal in America. So the American colonial experience with medals is outlined in a book famous among medal collectors, The American Colonial History Illustrated by Contemporary Medals, written by Charles Willis Betts. It was published posthumously in 1894 by his brother Frederick Betts, William Appleton, and Lyman Lowe, along with William Marvin. But it is considered to be one of the great works of American numismatic literature and has been used by collectors as a guide in forming the collections ever since. It's sort of an eclectic group of medals that were used. As the title suggests, Betts lists medals that refer to or were related to the history of the American colonies, regardless of their origin. Beginning with Spanish medals of the 16th century, references to America gradually became more common amongst medals issued by various powers. The 18th century saw a great increase of medals and related to the wars between colonial powers, their colonists, and the native populations. These rivalries resulted in victories and battles, peace and prosperity. All of this is left a legacy in the medals. So the first medals relating to the New World were issued by the Spanish and are part of the Betts 1 through 12 medals, which are collectively known as the Novi Orbis, or the New World, where the King of Spain, Philip II, claims the title of King of the New World. Betts 1, displayed here, is the earliest of the group, and issued to celebrate the accession of Philip II as King of Spain and the New Western World. For the first time that title had been used, while his father, Charles V, remained the Holy Roman Emperor. So here you can see the pieces to the left, excuse that, and well, this is not working the way it was intended to. Here's some of the other medals. There's the William Pitt Medal, the man who became a great hero among the American colonists because he was the leader of the English Parliament, the Prime Minister, and he led the government through the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian Wars as they were known here, becoming a hero because of that. And then after the war, when the British attitude towards the colonies changed, where they wanted us to pay for the war, he was a great champion of defending our rights to be represented and also not have arbitrary taxes placed upon us. So there's an example of the medal there. Here's a Treaty of Paris medal, Betts 610 from 1783. So this is the last of the colonial series, in the sense that this is the piece that ended the American Revolution. Yeah, sorry about the images did not show up of the other things. There's some interesting medals behind here. We have a Vernon medal in the background. There is a Dutch medal showing the Dutch representations of how they fought and defeated the Spaniards for independence, but also for control of access to the colonies. And then this medal at the center, the British Victories Medal of 1758, which outlines the victories of 1758, followed soon after by the Annus Mirabilis of the British Empire, 1759, where they defeated all of their enemies and ended up winning an empire well beyond the American colonies in India and other places. So we'll move on to the next. Now, the next case is the medals of the Comitia Americana. Comitia Americana stands for the American Congress. These are important because they were the first expressions of our nation in medallic form, and they were produced expressly to honor our leaders in the revolution. The first of these was the Washington before Boston medal. It was authorized in 1776. That's when the battle occurred. And however, all of these medals were issued several years or many years later because we didn't have the capability of making medals at the time. So we went to our ally, France, and the French were willing to allow their engravers to produce the medals for us, and they created quite a beautiful series of them. So the quote that we have here was the sentiment that inspired Continental Congress when in March of 1776, it approved the issuance of a gold medal to honor George Washington for driving the British from Boston. This medal inaugurated the Comitia Americana series issued by the infant United States to honor its military leaders. The 11 medals have traditionally also included the incomparable 1783 Libertas Americana medal, which we do have on display in that case as well, which was commissioned by Benjamin Franklin personally to commemorate the victories at Saratoga and Yorktown. These medals celebrated the heroes of the nascent nation, and it advertised to the world that the United States had defeated the world's premier maritime empire. And as the US lacked the capability to produce the medals, the minister to France, Benjamin Franklin, was asked to explore the possibility of having them made in France. France was a great place to go for this. Aside from them being an ally, they were renowned for their skill in producing metals. Historically, they'd been very involved in producing metals for several centuries as an expression of royal power, of national pride, but all very centralized and organized, actually. So they had training schools for their medalists. This was not a private enterprise as much as it was a government enterprise designed to enhance the power and prestige of the king and the nation. So men like Benjamin Duvivier, Nicolas Marie Gatteau, and Augustin Dupré all got involved in creating the Commedia Americana medals. Only one American actually was involved, and this was sort of an accident because the medal for Lee was late and forgotten. So Thomas Jefferson recommended an American medalist, Joseph Wright, to produce it, and that became the last of the medals to be presented. This is the Washington before Boston medal, and it's quite a beautiful piece to start the series. So we'll move on to the next. We have John Paul Jones, celebrated in another wonderful medal with great design for his famous battle with the Bonhomme Richard and his capture of the British frigate. Why am I forgetting the Serapis? That's it. An amazing event and beautiful medal. Next, we'll talk about, we have in a couple of different cases, the medals produced by the United States to commemorate our battles. At first, they were produced all by the US Mint after the Commedia Americana, starting with the War of 1812. This war was one that neither side really wanted to get involved in, but when they did, we surprised ourselves, actually, as our Navy turned out to be quite competent, and we ended up defeating the British in a series of small ship battles. Now, we could not possibly compare to the British in fighting a large naval battle. We didn't have the ships to do that. We had frigates, no ships of the line, i.e. the old battleships. So still, it was amazing that our frigates could defeat the British frigates in one-on-one battles. And it created a sensation around the world and naturally embarrassed the British and caused quite a bit of trouble for them. In order to celebrate these, we started producing medals that celebrate those victories. And then we also produced medals celebrating the battles that were fought on land. We were a bit less successful in that. We lost Washington. We were pushed out of our invasion of Canada, but we did have some successes, and we ended the war on a high note with the defeat of the British in New Orleans by Andrew Jackson. But the medals mark a coming of age of the US Mint, because for the first time we were able to use American engravers consistently. Well, expatriate European engravers, but we were using engravers who were living in the United States, and we were able to strike the medals here. And here's a series of the medals. We have one from, actually, this is the undeclared war against France at the upper left. And then we have a series of medals that celebrate some of the victories between the mostly individual ships and the British ships and the US ships. So we have the Wasp and its victory. The Wasp was fighting against the Reindeer and became, that name has been a name used in American ships ever since, which is true of many of the names that were used, the Constitution, Constellation, and others. And you see a couple of the other naval things and land battles. After the War of 1812, where we issued quite a number of medals, there's 20 plus medals that were issued celebrating various battles and naval victories. Things slowed down a bit for the Mint. They took more than a decade to finish all of the War of 1812 medals. The last were issued in the 1830s. But it wasn't until the Spanish-American War in 1848, or 1846 to 48, that the US began issuing more military medals. But by that time, government interest in celebrating military leaders had waned considerably, in large part for financial reasons, which left the field open for private issues by individual states, some of which were produced by the US Mint, but others began to be produced by the infant private medal producing sector. Nevertheless, medals were issued following the spectacular victories of the American forces, and a new crop of heroes made their appearance on the American stage, including 2 future presidents. Andrew Jackson had made his name in the War of 1812, but Tyler and other leaders became prominent in the Congress and in the future when the Civil War came along. So the Civil War presented an opportunity for medals, but the medals department at the Mint was in disarray because of several scandals that occurred during the 1850s, and government interest in them continued to be low. Nevertheless, several medals were made, especially to honor General Grant and his victorious campaigns during the war. Many private medals were also produced, the first of which commemorates the bravery of the soldiers who defended Fort Sumter against impossible odds. After that, since the Spanish-American War, American medals related to wars have focused on the bravery and contributions of the men and women involved, vilifications of the enemy, and other efforts related to the war, especially Red Cross and relief efforts for victims of war. Many were issued by private artist organizations. The US Mint currently offers a series of medals commemorating the branches of the American military and Coast Guard and their accomplishments, especially during World War II and to a lesser extent since then. So here are some neat examples. Here's a General Winfield Scott, who became the commander-in-chief of the forces during the very start of the Civil War, and exerted huge influence on the American military from just after the War of 1812 on to the Civil War. He actually established a lot of the traditions of success that we had. But this medal is an amazing 4-inch medal that celebrates the various battles that he is involved in, from Chapultepec to all the other battle scenes you see on here, which are really intricate, very amazing artwork. Some people criticize the medal for being a little busy, but it's a virtuoso display of what could be done, especially with such a large medal. We have the Fort Sumter medal at the right, which is a medal that was produced in the aftermath of Sumter, and they were distributed to the participants so the various leaders of that fight did get these. It was issued by from the citizens of New York, which is an interesting statement. So that they gave these to the various officers, and then the men received copper versions. The officers received silver. This one was given to Major Anderson. Then we have a World War I medal. This one is a famous medal that was produced to raise money for the families of the French soldiers that were killed during the war. This is produced in 1917, and it's a Paul Manship medal, beautiful piece showing the art of the time, the Art Deco style, quite beautiful. Then we have an example of the modern type of medals that are being issued by the Mint now. This one celebrates the Navajo code talkers of the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II. The code talkers were used to transmit messages via radio in Navajo, which the Japanese were unable to actually translate. So it became a very secure way of communication. So this is a neat medal that's available today by the U.S. Mint, celebrating that and other things that have happened since World War II as well. We go on. Now, one of the things that's really special about this exhibit is we have one of the highlights of the American Numismatic Association's medal collection, the George Washington 1792 engraved Indian Peace Medal. This is a very rare piece. It's one of about 7 that are recorded. And it's a small size piece that was issued in 1792. These are all hand engraved. And at this time, that was done because the Mint was still at that point, I mean, 1792 is when the Mint was founded, and it was incapable of doing the larger pieces. It was in the process of developing the capability of doing, at this point, cents, and then in the next year, they would be producing dollars and other size denominations of coins, and their focus was on coinage. So they didn't have the capacity or time to do any medals at this point. But the Indian peace medals made their first appearance during the late 17th century when French colonial officials presented silver medals to Native American chiefs. Giving medals became an established practice of the European colonial powers in North America, including Spain and Great Britain, that lasted until the end of the 19th century. The United States quickly realized that the medals were an important part of Indian negotiations soon after gaining independence. It was very important that when European and American leaders met with the native chiefs, that they exchanged gifts. It was a tradition among the natives, and these medals became an important part of that. And they became a symbol of the agreement and the sentiments passed on. They also became a personal emblem of importance. The fact that a chief would have a medal meant that it gave them prestige among their own people, because the European power involved, or the United States, considered them important enough to negotiate with. And they negotiated as diplomatic representatives of their nations, just as our representatives were acting in a diplomatic fashion. Now, we all know the deplorable record overall of how these negotiations worked out, but especially the earlier ones, they were handled as a way of treating among equals, regardless of whatever the attitudes may have been at the time. So if you look at the 1792 Indian Peace Medal, the engraved Washington piece, you'll see that it's very interestingly and deliberately designed. So you've got the chief on the left. He's holding onto a peace pipe, which George Washington is also holding. This is George Washington is represented in uniform. And he's standing next to a tree representing the forest and the native land. Washington is standing in front of a background that includes a farmhouse in the distance and a plowed field in the middle distance. So this is representing the two different cultures, civilizations, and working together to create peace. The chief has a tomahawk on the ground, so he's laid down his weapon, and the two of them are sharing a peace pipe, showing that, you know, the intent to create a lasting peace. The other medals that we have here represent the first and last of the series, from the Happy While United medal created by the British military in Canada, or, well, we were still part, this is after the 7 Years' War, so before the American Revolution, as they realized that they needed to create better relations with the tribes all along the Mississippi, and then in Canada itself, and in the northeastern and south, the southern areas from Florida and the western portions of what became Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And so they produced these medals locally to represent relations between the Europeans and, well, the British and the Indians. At the time, the British authorities in England were unwilling to actually spend the money. They didn't think it was as important, but the local authorities did. The next thing you see here is at the center, we have an example of the Washington Seasons medals. Now, there were a series of 3 of these medals produced, representing domestic scenes. They were intended to be used in the second presidency of George Washington, but since the Mint was still unable to spend the resources to produce medals, they were actually commissioned from England, and they took a long time to produce, longer than expected. So they didn't actually arrive until after the end of Washington's second presidency, and they became, well, they were used actually during John Adams' presidency and into Thomas Jefferson's presidency as medals to be distributed. So 700 were ordered, 200 in silver and 500 in silver, 200 in copper, and they were used mostly after the middle of John Adams' presidency. We're not sure exactly how many were received. We know that at least 400 were received. This medal and the other 2 in the series were generously loaned to us by the Massachusetts Historical Society, so we're deeply indebted for that. These are extremely rare, beautiful pieces. And then we have a silver example, not an original, but a silver piece of Thomas Jefferson. The original Indian peace medals that were issued by the US Mint were silver that were distributed. On rare occasions, when they were short of the silver medals, there were some bronze pieces were passed to the Indians, but almost exclusively the originals would be silver. The bronze medals were actually later produced for the public, at first as commemorations of the presidents themselves, because we didn't have a presidential series of medals at the time, and then later as mementos of Indian peace, medals for collectors, things like that. And then we have a Benjamin Harrison medal of the last series, before the Indian peace medals ceased to be produced by the Mint ceased to be used by the government in Indian affairs. So all of these medals are interesting. They range from the original treating with the natives as equals, happy while united, they're seated on a bench sharing a peace pipe, the Washington and the chief as equals, to the Thomas Jefferson medal, where you have peace and friendship, and you have the hand on one side with a silver arm brace that's representing the Native American, and the uniform collar on the left hand with the tomahawk and peace pipe, to later medals, which pretty much exclusively identified the things that we wanted the Indians, the Native Americans, to do, which is become settled, start farming, start living and looking like Europeans, like American farmers, which represents a change in the status, because as time went on, the relative military power changed significantly, and you can see it as it develops in the medals. Now, the presidential series is next, and it began to be produced regularly by the US Mint in the 1860s with the striking of popular dime-sized medalettes, often featuring Washington or Lincoln busts. Prior to that time, Indian peace medals struck in copper were sold by Mint officers to the public. Starting with Rutherford B. Hayes, the Mint began to strike 3-inch bronze medals for sale to collectors specifically to commemorate the American presidents. The series expanded rapidly with the addition of special retrospective medals for Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, and William Henry Harrison. Subsequent medals were produced soon after the presidents began their terms, with the exception of medals later produced to fill in the gap for earlier presidents. Today, the Mint still sells presidential medals, including the current president, in 2 sizes in bronze, 3 inches and 1 5/16 inches, and starting in 2018 in 40.5 millimeter silver medals. As you can see, each of them features a bust of the president along with their inaugural dates on the obverse and reverse, and an image based either on original Indian peace medal designs for the earlier ones, or a modern design featuring a quote from the president. Presidential medals continue to be popular as keepsakes and collector's items. One of the things that occurred around the turn of the 20th century was, as presidential inaugurations were important events, presidents started to want medals for their inauguration. The Mint was unable to produce the medals quickly enough for that. So one of the things you see is that the presidents began to order medals before the Mint medals were produced, and these are known as the inaugural medals, and they're different in that their designs emphasize the inauguration, and they do not have a quote. They do not follow the current modern standard. So you have a mixture of medals here. We have a Lincoln Indian Peace Medal. It's got the design that was used for him. There's another medal that was produced later as the presidential medal, but this is what was used originally. Then you have the Harrison Medal. This is a presidential medal that today you might mistake as an inaugural medal, but it was actually produced as a presidential medal. Then Woodrow Wilson. We've got Harry S. Truman and Barack Obama. All of these are represented along with all the more recent presidents since the 20th century and the 21st century. One of the interesting cases that we have that's different in that it's covering, instead of just the medals produced by the Mint or something else, this is covering the idea of social movements, of civil rights, and the medals that represent it. So this is it's a great case in and of itself, but it also represents how medals have been used in the U.S. for different other movements as well. These are some of these medals. There's some great medals in here. So we have Martin Luther King. He's represented in huge numbers of medals that were produced in the 60s and 70s and since then. And this is a nice medal commemorating his message of "I have a dream" and peace and justice and brotherhood for everyone. Some of the medals in here are really special. There's this Frederick Douglass medal. Oops, sorry about that. Generously loaned to us by John Karlovich, is one of my favorites. It's a beautiful, interesting design, and represents the great Frederick Douglass, who was such an inspiration and pioneer in trying to establish equal rights and a place for African Americans in the United States. At the left, we have a badge that was used in the South, actually, in the city of Charleston here, as an African American man or person. You'd have to carry this badge. This badge showed that you were free, so you could not be treated as a slave and all that, but you had to have this badge, otherwise you were liable to be mistreated and thrown in jail or whatever. It's a sobering emblem of what it was like before emancipation and all that. And then we have the Emancipation Medal that was produced with Lincoln's image. He was the sponsor for this, and you can see Emancipation proclaimed January 1st of 1863. So that's an interesting case you should get a chance to see. The next thing is we have a case on military decorations. Military decorations have played an important part in American history, particularly after the Civil War. And at the center, we have the most important, most prestigious of them all, the Medal of Honor, or sometimes known as the Congressional Medal of Honor. And the case features a whole series of medals for various accomplishment, bravery, and then also for military service, efficiency, that kind of thing. We also have the Purple Heart at the left here. Now, the Purple Heart is an interesting story because it's the earliest medal in its first iteration, when it was known as the Medal of Merit, shaped in the form of a heart, that was produced by George Washington. Only 3 of them were actually presented during the American Revolution, and then it lapsed for many, many years until basically in 1927, the idea of reinstituting the Purple Heart Medal was put forward, and in 1932 it actually was reinstituted. And at first it was similar to the earlier Medal of Merit, but and it was awarded to veterans of World War I, American veterans of World War I, back to the start of the war for the U.S. in 1917. It was only during World War II that it took on what we think of it as today as a medal for wounded soldiers. So if you get wounded, you will earn a Purple Heart as a memento of that. And that's how it's viewed today. But it is the earliest of the US medals. And then we have the Legion of Merit, which is the 7th in order of precedence of the US military awards, and is given for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements, not necessarily in combat, but is for service and outstanding service in the military. So this gives you a taste of some of the medals you can see in that case. Now, one of the important sections of this exhibit is a series of 3 cases that are based on the Baker Manley collection of numismatic Washingtonia. Recently, in 2021, the American Numismatic Association became the home of the Baker Manley collection. It is the ultimate grouping of its kind not only for its quality and size, there's more than 950 pieces, and many of them are just outstanding, best known pieces, or just very in great condition. But it's important for its provenance. This collection, the core, was formed by William Spohn Baker, the first numismatist to write a comprehensive catalog of George Washington related medals. They were first authorized by the United States during the Revolutionary War to reward our military leaders. And the first of them, as I mentioned before, is the British, the Washington before Boston Medal of 1776. And ever since then, George Washington has been a favorite subject of American medals. And he personally was not shy about having his image taken. He sat for many portraits, and his image was used on a myriad of objects during his lifetime, including mugs, teapots, broadsides, tokens, and more. Now, this collection features a huge number of all of these times when he appeared on medals, from medals that portray him as an icon to medals that are of a political nature, the political leader, the icon, the celebrated father of the country. And these medals really tell that story in a very interesting and surprising way in many times. I mean, Washington's image has been used for many things. You'll see at the right here, this is a small medal that basically was used during the Civil War to celebrate, to support that the Union must and shall be preserved. And Washington is the great leader represented as the Cincinnatus of America. Cincinnatus was a Roman leader who was a general who was asked to take dictatorial powers in order to save the Roman Republic from its enemies at the time. And what was amazing to the Romans, and ever since, was that despite having the dictatorial powers, once he finished his job and defeated the enemies, he chose to retire and give up his powers. And Washington did the same thing, and quite consciously, because he was aware of the story of Cincinnatus, he believed that as a republic, no single individual is more important than anyone else. And he retired as the leader of the American armies of the Revolution, when everybody, most people would have supported him, and some wanted him to be king. He chose specifically to retire to private life. And then when he was asked to, he became president, and he chose to retire after his second presidency again. And for that, Europeans in particular, but Americans all honored him, because he could have had absolute power if he wanted, but he chose to give that power up because he believed in freedom and a republican democratic form of government. And so this gives you a nice selection of some of the medals. And then we have clubs and organizations represented. And here we have a selection of different medals produced by the ANA and by the ANS and by the Chicago Coin Club. There are many other medals in there. And at the center, we have the ANA Numismatic Art Award, the NAMS Award, which has been given for the last 50 plus years to a select artist, metal engraver every year. And so we have, the ANA has been the site of 2 FIDM Congresses. So we have the 2007 one at the upper left, and the lower right centers the 1987 medal for the 50th anniversary of FIDM, the International Congress of Medallic Art, or FIDM in French. And then we have a beautiful medal done by the ANS in the 1980s, the medal that portrays a cellator striking a coin with coins from the A&S collection in the background. Wonderful medal. And then the Elvira Klein Stefanelli Memorial Award for Achievement in Numismatics that is awarded to women for their achievements in collecting and scholarship in numismatics. With that, we'll go on to a display of some of the art medals we have. One of the things that we included was a series of cases highlighting modern art in medals. So here's the case that shows medals from the A&A collection of art. There's medals from a number of different artists, ranging from Victor David Brenner to Alexander Shagan for modern art, and Laura Garden Fraser on the right. A number of different individuals, including Augustus St. Gons on the right upper level. Some neat pieces, something worth seeing. We have medals that also show the Society of Medalists medals and individuals. Such, we highlight two individuals, Eugene Daub and Jeannie Stephen Solman's work in a case as well. So it's all great stuff for people to see beyond just the historical medals and the standard medals that are produced by the Mint. Here's a very quick and short tour of the exhibit itself. Here's the entrance with the introductory panel, and you can see various cases in the background. As you go through, there's the cases that show the striking of medals and the casting of medals. On the back side of the panel, we have the early medallic history, the Renaissance. Here we have an aisleway between the George Washington medal cases and the American colonies case. You can see Indian peace medals in the background moving off into the distance. Here's the case with the Indian peace medals of the early period with the Massachusetts Historical Society Seasons medals and the 1792 George Washington medal, flanked by a George III Indian peace medal that was issued from the 1770s through the early 1800s. There's the Washington cases, the Baker Manley collection. That's just a small selection of them. Then slavery and abolition. And in the background, you can see our video wall, which has videos that show various elements of American history in a random sort of way, and pretty interesting visual piece. And then looking back towards the Harry Bass collection exhibit, you can see the U.S. Mint medals, military battles and leaders, and other stories about medals and how they tell the story of American history. The medallic art section. In the background, you can see a series of medals that were loaned to us by modern artists. There's 12 artists featured. Here's the case with Eugene Daub and Jean Stephen Solman's medals. And with that, I'll end. And one of the things that you should be looking for in the near future is that we have a virtual exhibit for this exhibit that is coming up very soon. We also have our Money Museum online displays ranging from just presentations about exhibits to the virtual exhibits themselves. The virtual exhibit for the Medal of America is here. It'll be added to significantly soon with a main page for the exhibits as a whole, and the Baker Manley collection, and then a virtual display that will be coming up in the next 4 or 5 months. And with that, I would like to end the presentation and invite any questions, comments. Thank you.
All righty, excellent. Then I'll have you go ahead and stop that screen share. It should be a red button at the top of your screen. It says stop share.
Yep. Let's go here.
Alrighty, and then for everyone watching, we do already have a few things in the Q&A, but you are now welcome to send those in. It should be a button at the bottom of that Zoom window. You do have to move your mouse around within the Zoom window for this to pop up. So feel free to send in any questions. In the meantime, we do already have some in here. So what was the initial inspiration behind the exhibit? Why medals?
Well, in part, it's because medals are something that I've been increasingly interested in, and medals are different than coins and paper money in that they're larger, they have more space to do actual artwork, and they tend to focus on history, on events in a way that coins don't as much. So there's a lot more of a story that can be put into them, either ranging from social events to battles and leaders, which are very typical, to the political celebrating a particular ruler or a particular country. And I thought it would be interesting to do something different than your standard art historical approach, where, oh yeah, this medal was done by so and so, and they're part of this series of Art Deco medals that were produced and the art work of the time or whatever, and try to tell the stories that are represented by the medals, what's on them, and how that reflects history as we know it.
All righty. When could the U.S. Mint first strike 3-inch medals?
The first 3-inch medals really, it goes back to about the 1830s that they've got that ability. They were able to do 2-inch medals as early as the late 1790s, but because of the workload that was necessary to produce the whole series of US coins, they were really developing the denominational series for use as money. They didn't have the time or capacity to produce anything larger for metals themselves, even though they had the capacity for those 2-inch and smaller. It wasn't until the late 1840s, that they actually had the capacity to do 4-inch metals. And you see the very first ones of those being produced for the Mexican-American War.
All righty. How often do you change exhibits?
We change our main floor exhibit. It's about a 2,000 square foot area, approximately every 2 years. But that's changed. I mean, it changes based on circumstances. COVID obviously slowed this one down, so we had a major blockage there, but approximately every 2 years.
All right. How did the U.S. Mint do mahogany patination in the mid to late 1800s?
Well, it was traditional to basically pickle a coin. So what would happen? The metals, basically the metals would be produced. The model would be made, and then the dies created. Once they struck the metals, with metals, it's a complicated process in that they don't do one strike. Metals can take a minimum of 3 to 8 or even more strikes to produce. And each time they strike the metals, they will anneal them. Because each time you strike anything metal, it gets harder. Now it has to be softened in order to make it more pliable and make it easier to strike again. And so they heat the metal and do that. Well, what happens now, it's different in different places, but what happens now is that once they get to a certain point, either the final strike or just before the final strike, they will treat the metal in chemicals to clean them and all this. In the 19th century, after the final strike, the mint would have a special mixture, and it varied, but different chemicals that would in part clean the metal, but also put a patination on them. And this could be done in several steps. And the preferred one earlier on, before the 1880s, was this chocolate brown that gave a really beautiful dark finish to them. Now, no one's exactly certain what that, as far as I'm aware, no one's exactly certain what that mixture is. But in the 1880s, they changed a bit, and instead of having the rich, very glossy finish, they changed to a more flat finish, a little bit, I mean, still dark, but a less, I mean, to me, to the modern viewer, I think a lot of people think they're a little bit less attractive. And then the modern look that we have today, which is the yellow bronze finish, is actually a result of one of a government official visiting France and seeing what the latest French style was, which is to sandblast the metals and have this lighter finish to them. And so he came back to the United States and said, well, why aren't you following the latest fashions? And so the US Mint decided, well, I guess we have to do this. And they started sandblasting metals. And it's also the time when the Mint, it coincides with the time when the Mint converted from copper, because our earliest metals were actually copper with a bronze finish. And that patination was put on there to impart that bronze look. They were switching over to bronze, actual bronze. And so these new metals were sandblasted and treated and have this look that, personally, I think is less attractive. But they've gotten better over the years. And since the 1970s, the finish, they have less of the sandblasting. They have a little bit of a glossy look to them, more so than the early 20th century, where they're sort of flat and dull, in my opinion, anyway.
Alrighty, then we have one more in the Q&A right now. So if you had any other questions, audience members, go ahead and send them in. Otherwise, we will wrap it up after this one. What percentage of Jefferson Hollow silver medals were used in the Lewis and Clark expedition?
It was a very small percentage. The hollow medals were the two largest sizes. The smallest size was solid. But I mean, percentage-wise, you're talking probably 5%. There weren't a large number of the 4-inch medals. The 3-inch medals were slightly more numerous, but I think they had, well, I don't have the exact numbers right now. They had something like 300 medals to start with, but many of them were the seasons medals, and then they even supposedly used some dollar coins when they ran out. But I think it was no more than, maybe 2 dozen of the large and 3 dozen of the middle size. But I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I can't tell you. I actually do have the Kruka book. I could look it up if we want to take the time. But
so if for the person who asked that question, if you would like an exact answer, you're welcome to send it in through the contact us form on the symposium site, and we'll forward it along to Doug.
Peter Jones has actually written a book on the subject of early metals, including some of the Indian piece metals. So I'm sure he has that available. Mm-hmm. Hi, Peter.
Alrighty, then there's nothing else in the Q&A, so I think that will wrap us up. Thank you very much, Doug, for taking the time to present and introduce us all to this new exhibit. I hope I'm able to get out there to see it while it's still up. So
yeah, and as I said, we will have a virtual exhibit, including a virtual tour, where you can go online and virtually walk through the exhibit and see everything. It'll be pretty amazing because you'll be able to see every metal, obverse and reverse, blown up on your screen. So that will be really cool. But it's going to take about 6 months. So
these things take time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present. This is a great series. So thanks for all your work.
Yes, happy to have you. And for the attendees, starting at 1 o'clock, we have 2 more presentations starting. We'll have Bob Baer talking about CAC, and then Ray and Steve Feller talking about some coinage from during the Holocaust. And I think they have paper money in there as well. So feel free to tune into both of those. I hope to see some familiar names in the future presentations, and have a good afternoon.